effort in recognizing that. So we said that let's talk about how much we are investing so that people can understand how much we work and try to, uplift the sector. But on the other hand, as we see ourselves investing this money every year, we also get back to ourselves and realize actually we cannot survive the next 10 years if we keep spending like this and fundraising like this. Personally, I'm getting tired of being nice to everyone so that they give me money and also going to all these receptions and dinners because you want money. I think it's also about us realizing that, okay, how can I create a balance of living my life as well as doing the work that I do without stressing so much. So it's a threat that if we don't think as an organization how we're going to be surviving the next 10 years, we'll be not surviving anymore. So we are trying to think of how do we put measures in place and to diversify our resources. The three of us have been in conversation, and George has a very good big advantage from Nairobi. Ayeta has also created her landmark. And then we see ourselves. So we agreed, the three of us, to see what can we do about from a regional level. How can we help ourselves as the three organizations to survive the next 10 years? At the same time, we also locally we have to identify ways of keeping ourselves operational. So these are some of the things that we have been discussing, and we are going to share with you some of the thoughts that we are having, and the measures that we are taking at a local level, and those that we are taking at a regional level, to make sure that we can have your input, but at the same time we are also thinking hard to see that we are not going to fall victims of what others have demonstrated. We've seen those that have failed, and we don't want to fail. We want to continue. We want to leave a legacy. We want to support the sector the way we are supporting it now, and even better. And I think that is a very important challenge to us, to make sure that we are not going to fall apart and say, okay, we didn't manage to have a budget for this year. Oh my God, let's shut down. But we really see that if I cannot afford a certain percentage of my budget, how can George help me? How can Ayeta help me? And if they cannot also support themselves, how can I support them? So with that, we've agreed to collaboratively set up an endowment fund, which maybe Ayeta can talk more, and George later. And that is going to really help the three organizations to have a 50% interest coming back to our programming, and then a 50% that we'll be able to share with the rest of the artists, but only those who are also interested in sustaining themselves. It cannot be just like, you want to write a book and you come and we give you our money. It's going to be our money. Yeah, so we're also going to be like not setting terms like Griffin or like Heva or like Dune or British Council, but we are trying to work with the artists because we understand each other and help them, but at the same time first helping ourselves to survive. Yeah. George.
You're done? Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Faisal. Before I move to the next speakers, I will ask you a few questions. First of all, you say, first, congratulations for 10 years of working in that field. But the first question is, 2 billion shillings, which shillings? Is it Tanzania shilling, Kenya shilling, Uganda shilling? And I just want to put it in terms of dollars so that everybody gets into perspective, right?
I think 2 billion is around $500,000.
$500,000.
Yeah. Or more, maybe. We work in shillings, so.
$500,000. Everybody's right with that? Fine, $500,000. Secondly, I would like you to explain a bit. You know, not everybody here understands the terms that I use, especially financial terms. Explain a bit about endowment fund. We hear all these terms, impact investment fund, endowment fund, and I'm quite sure there are quite a number. So what is an endowment fund, please, for the audience?
Yeah, an endowment fund is a fund that has been in existence for so many years, and I think the thought around it is that it's the investment you put in the bank without using it, but you only use the profit. So it's a fixed amount that you put in the bank, and the bank gives you an interest. So we intend, our target actually is to raise a $1 million endowment, and then that would give us, depending on which bank we are going to use as an investment bank. But like in Uganda now, the interest rate is around 12 to 15%. So if I have a $1 million investment in the bank, in Stanbic, or I get a 15% interest at the end of the year, and that would be $150,000, which if I take 50, Ayeta 50 and George 50, then we can run our programs.
Well, thank you very much, Faisal. Please, a round of applause again for Faisal. I would now welcome George Gachara, Executive Director of the Nest Collective Kenya. For the, yesterday you introduced yourself as a HEVA fund. Here I'm seeing the Nest Collective.
So I'm a hustler. And part of my hustle is that I'm a member of the Nest Collective, not its executive director. Nest Collective is the company whose mandate created HEVA Fund. So I am an employee of HEVA Fund, but I am a member of the Nest Collective. And the reason why I'm speaking here as part of the Nest Collective is the Nest Collective is more interested in the endowment fund and not in HEVA Fund. And the difference is that the Nest Collective really is an arts organization. And my contribution right now is on two levels. The first level is considering this issue of finance, and especially finance for public programs, arts programs, not enterprise. As my presentation around HEVA were around creative industries and financing the industries. But as far as this panel is concerned, my input will be very much around artistic financing and financing of arts institutions. The first level of my presentation is to acknowledge that the reason I'm conspiring together with Ayeta and Faisal is because it's people I respect and people I deeply, deeply appreciate their work in their geographies, and that it's not even about money, it's about creating a support system that understands our mandates, that understands our geographies, and deeply understands our challenges. And one of the ways we've managed to understand our challenges is around the issue of financing our continued comfortable growth. And so I think it's 2 years ago when this conversation began, and maybe my journey to this conversation has been that the arts programming for public programs have predominantly been financed by donor finances. In Kenya, the Dutch, the British, the Danish, many European governments have been financing the arts for a long time. Our public sector has been doing a lot of heritage financing, and so they finance part of the museums, the heritage sites, but then contemporary culture and artistic output and aesthetics have been predominantly been financed by the Europeans and private philanthropies. And we have observed in the last 10 years that either because of changes in geopolitical interests or changes in the economy, or what East African countries have been doing is moving to a middle income status. The priorities of donor finance have shifted, and therefore also interest in direct finances for the arts. And institutions that have continued to survive on grants are struggling. We've seen around the ecosystem a lot of institutions crumbling, closing, reducing their programming, including some services, artistic services that we really like. Even here in Tanzania, we've seen these shifts. And as a response, and as responsible managers of artistic programs, we have to start to think, what is next? What is the next conversation around resourcing public art programs? And so together with Ayeta and Faisal, we find ourselves in the same ecosystem, in the same budget structure, in the same financial cycles. And so our first challenge was, can we save together as institutions? And so we put a challenge to ourselves that each year we should at least save $10,000 per institution and put it in a fund. So whether now we shall call it an endowment or call it an impact fund depends on the principles, because we've decided that we will start to create a grown-up plan. Everyone who grows up at one point wants to buy a house, wants to buy a car, or wants to take their children to school. Even institutions have their growth path. And so then, as an institution grows, you want to become more independent, you want to pay better salaries, you want to acquire production facilities, you want to secure your future growth. And while artistically we argue that if your mandate is over, you need to close and refresh, but artistic institutions should be able to be there perpetually to allow continuous generations of young people to produce, to learn, especially in the absence of public financed programs. And so together with Ayeta and Faisal, we've been wondering, how is it that we put our anxieties together around artistic resourcing? How then do we start to mobilize our own finances to go already into this pot? And then how do we start to attract other people to join in the same terms as us? No one is getting a lift here. Everyone carries their responsibility, because we also can conspire and dream together. And then how do we construct a program that safeguards our continued growth, but also gives back into the ecosystem, either through impact investment or through direct programs or through grant making. But our interest is not to displace the existing institutions that make grants or impact investment, is to create a facility that understands our own dynamics. I'll give you an example. If you go to agribusiness right now, you can have a full conference for funds, not for people who are interested in the money from the funds. You can fill this room with people who are giving money in agriculture. If you go to energy and climate change, you'll find 100 impact funds in that space. You go to any industry, but if you think about the artistic sector, you'll say Hiva Fund, and then we'll say thank you Grofin for remembering us, and then now you start to go into the European funds, you know. And Hiva Fund definitely relies a lot also on external investors. However, as institutions based in these geographies, we must start to think of ourselves as critical players who have the ability to conspire and also raise resources for the objectives that we need. So that is my path to this chama. Yes.
A round of applause, please, for George. Thank you very much, George. I have understood you very well, but you have created a lot of questions into my mind. First of all, I'm seeing that there is a shift, as you're saying, from traditional funding towards new funds like impact investment, etc., etc. But one caution that I would say is we should not completely leave the traditional funders. They exist, they have structures, maybe they have the donors, the government, the partners, the private money. They exist katika structures, those old structures, and probably they're going to exist for a long time. So one of the things that I noticed is that there is going to be there. You have spoken also about the money mostly coming from Europe or Western world. I just wonder, we have not explored the Asian side of funding, the Chinese, or maybe you have, the Chinese and the rest in that direction into these kinds of ventures. So hopefully in the future here, we would hear about them as well. Now I would like to welcome our third speaker, Ayeta and Wangusa, Executive Director of CDEA Tanzania, for her presentation. Thank you. Karibu.
Well, I don't really have a presentation, just to say, when George approached me, and I think we met at
Namskia? Oh, take this one.
We met at a meeting of a mutual donor, and they had plans of starting an investment fund, and we said, we also have plans of starting something like that. And then he said, why shouldn't we contact Faisal? And then I was like, these guys are 24, so it's better to connect to the young people. Yeah, but basically it's also because the donor funding scene was really becoming tricky. Just as we had gotten a mutual donor, CKU, and then the death of CKU came and were handed over to Danida. So you have to be innovative and see how can you survive. And we have very big plans. We have plans of setting up an eco Sanaa village here in Dar es Salaam. And questions began coming, how are we going to do this if we can't even, don't even have our own money to put in? Someone yesterday said we can't, I think it was Stephen, who said that we can't invest in ideas, we can invest in something that has been done. So we thought it is important that we came together and started this fund. And also, it's unfortunate you're talking about looking at Asia. We are still exploring that. In fact, we are trying to push our chair, Moderator, to fly to China and or Korea to talk to the Chinese. But it's unfortunate that most times we find ourselves looking to the global north, because that's how our colonial relationships have been, and we somehow continue to be friends with them. And recently, the Ford Foundation launched, which was a big supporter of the creative economy. For a long time supported Tanzania and East Africa, and then they stopped funding. Then somehow they announced they would support culture, but then attached to things about minority and equity issues. But then announced their shift or joining the bandwagon of impact investors and putting $1 billion over 10 years in that direction. So for me, it was an opportunity to tell my friends, hey, why can't we, structure ourselves at that vehicle that can channel in funds that can support the creative sector in East Africa, owing to the fact that there's no one doing that. So they have to be champions in the region. And so I've been, nudging my colleagues whenever I see Ford Foundation, posting anything. I nudge them, they are silent. I think they want to go to China first. But so we want to try that also, to attract that funding here. I know that most of the impact investors are not thinking about the creative sector per se, maybe where the nexus comes with ICT or manufacturing. But as George spoke earlier, he's speaking from a creative economy point of view. Somebody has to speak about that clearly. So that's what I'm thinking. And you mentioned about SAGOT as a best case study in Tanzania. It's not that old, but it also had government support. It was launched by the government, it had the support of the former president. So we need also to bring on board political actors who can support us to bring even the money further by understanding what we mean and then bring the money to East Africa.
A round of applause, please, for Ayeta. Thank you very much, Ayeta. Again, you, like George, you're bringing a lot of questions into my mind, and I think also to the audience. You've mentioned Ford Foundation. I am a director for TAFCA, which is Tanzania Federation of Arts and Crafts. I am a director for financing, administration, IT. I'm not finished. And Utawala. Utawala is administration, okay. We have met with Chinese players who had come to Tanzania and had shown interest in financing an area of art in Tanzania. I think my president, Adrian Nyangamale, is here. And the last time you had a meeting with the China-Africa Business Council, am I correct? Yes, you had a, please stand up. This is the president of Tanzania Federation of Arts and Crafts. He had a meeting last time I was unable to attend with China-Africa Business Council. So I'm just opening up on the fund that we're talking about, that the possibilities can extend, as I was saying, from local investment, it can go to external investment. But here from local investment, yesterday I spoke a bit about local governments. These people collect taxes, which the money is from wananchi, and how do we make them, even in the foreseeable future, get into arts field? Because like Dar es Salaam, I think they collect about 50 billion a month or more. How much of that 50 billion goes into arts? I wonder. They don't even have madiwani, we call them madiwani, councillors. In Kenya you have counties. In Uganda, what do you have? You have local governments? Yeah, he doesn't know. Okay, good. He doesn't care either. Fine. I think now we would like to have comments, suggestions, questions, and warnings. From, I see Danny there, his hand. Who will help? Okay. Who would like to, if someone feels like they want to write a question and send it up here, that's fine. If they want to ask the questions themselves, that's fine. They can come here and ask the questions to the panelists here. My question before any of those questions or comments come is, how do we make a case? How do we make a case? This is a topic that we are talking about. You have spoken very well. It looks like a bit of a, how do we make a bigger case? It's just like that. How do we make a bigger case? To all these players that we're talking, local and external, major, small ones, how do we involve them? How do we convince them? How can we be creative in convincing them to put their money in such funds, be endowment funds or all these forms of funds? Okay, I see another hand there. I can start with Danny. Please come here. You can ask the question from here.
Well, thanks a lot. Thanks to the panel for the presentation, and I think from my end, it's a more of a, as an investment expert, I've worked with endowment funds, with a lot of funds, and understand how they work. It's just some kind of, I'm trying to give some kind of advice and maybe to look in terms when you're looking into the future, what needs to be done. I think the idea is good. What I'm not sure is I think you might need to do to raise the funding you require. You might be needing to do a restrictive endowment funding because that becomes easier for the donor at least to measure the impact of this fund. If you are going to just to do a normal non-restrictive one, definitely people will think that their money might also start going out and what. The other thing which you need to also look at is, I'm not sure because you guys are sitting in 3 different East African countries. I'm not sure about the margins of interest you're talking about. It might be 15% in Uganda, currency, yes. 16% margin in Tanzania shillings. I don't know, in Kenya it might be 10%. So there is the issue of exchange rate risk and the margins which, and if you want to put it in dollars again, I don't think you'll ever a margin of more than 4 to 5%. So that is what needs to be very clear. The other issue which is very important when you're going, if you're going to put up an endowment fund, is the issue of governance of the fund. Because all you 3 guys, you have your own organization and you're running your own agenda. So I think from funding point of view, and if someone wants to come into this endowment fund, we'll definitely need to have some kind of a very good kind of a governance so that there is at least a Chinese wall between your programs and what the funds will be running. But from where I'm standing, I think it's a very good idea. It's a very good initiative from private people, not sitting here and trying to getting, some money out of government or what, which is brilliant for me, and I think that is the right way. And for creative industry, of course, it will give a very good advantage in terms of the programs you'll want to do. But thanks again. That's my little contribution on this.
Please, don't go away. Please, Danny, please don't go away. I think you have said the word restrictive endowment fund. I think my audience needs to know what is a restrictive endowment fund.
Maybe let me explain it by a simple example. If, for example, British Council wants to give £1 million, $1 million into the endowment fund, they will say that this $1 million should not be withdrawn for any activity of the fund. You can invest it, put it in an interest-bearing account. The interest, yes, you use it too, but this $1 million should not fully be drawn. So they will always see that every year the governing body will check and say that the British Council $1 million is still there. Or they might say, you can use out of this we are putting £800,000 should not be withdrawn from the fund. So they are sure that that money sits. What you are using is only the interest you have generated from the capital. So that is how the restrictive. And a lot of the supporters, I think people like Danida, people like all the guys who can support this. If you're pitching it on restrictive nature of the fund, it makes more sense for them to invest on the endowment fund. That's it.
Thank you, Danny. A round of applause for Danny, please. Danny is not saying everything. I'm seated on the same table with him, and yesterday he told me something. He said, "Don't worry, Robert, don't worry. The money is there. You just need proper management structures." So that's interesting. Please welcome. I saw you raising your hand.
Thank you. My name's Rocker. I'm here with the British Council. And we're not going to give £1 million straight away. or not at least in this little thing. I just wanted to talk a little bit about it. There seems to be an anxiety about traditional funders leaving that you mentioned, Mr. Chairperson. That's sort of funny because I really don't think there should be, and I don't think there is. I'm really pleased to have with me British Council arts colleagues from Ethiopia, Kenya, our Tanzania arts manager, also in the room from Uganda, and we really want to learn. I mean, absolutely, money is going down with regards to a lot of European funders due to politics, Brexit, etc., etc. But I think it's not about like us leaving you or you leaving us, but more surely about just leaving an old way of working. And what we're all looking for is more intelligent, honest, smarter ways of working. Hence, all of us being here to learn from the minds of George and Faisal and Ayeta. We've got the privilege of already starting relationships with George and Ayeta, and it's such a privilege to be working with such honest, risk-taking individuals. And also had the privilege of working with Faisal when I used to run my own organisation and receive money from British Council. And I just think that's the shift. Surely that's the divorce, is from a sort of top-down, very problematic, power-structured way of giving and receiving money to a more daring, innovative way of receiving and saying no to money and creating our own money. And I'm really convinced, you know, Dune Foundation, Gertrude Flentage, and the Lambent Foundation, Michelle Coffey, we're all ready to learn and to sort of see and open our ears to how we can build new relationships, because we have to, because we are losing our unique selling point. We don't have so much money, so we have to have so much something else. We have to have so much more intelligence. So I think rather than this language of we're getting a divorce, we're leaving each other. No, we're here, you know, and we're not going to go away. We need to just completely change the types of relationships that we have.
Oh, thank you very much. What did you say your name?
Rocker.
Rocker. Am I saying it correctly?
Yeah.
Yes, Rocker. Thank you very much. The British Council are saying we are here. We might change strategy, but we are here. And I think we need first, okay, I've seen you, a response from the panelists here before we move forward. I know Danny gave his comments, and now Rocker. So who wants to respond to this?
For Daniel, I think it's very good points that you raised. And as we've been discussing, George and Ayeta, we've had a lot of back and forth sharing of documents and policies and NDAs, and trying to figure out who is going to take responsibility. Are we going to have a restricted endowment? Yes, we are going to have a restricted endowment because we don't want to use the money that we are investing, but we only want to use the interest. And how do we also share that interest that we get? And that's why we say that let's keep investing each year till we hit our target of 1 million, because that could give us a substantial interest at the end of the year. And also, when we talked about the exchange risk margins, we've been reviewing the bank laws and regulations, and we all agreed that Kenya had more favorable bank laws. So we agreed to have the endowment banked in Kenya on George's guarantee. Yeah. But we were like, if we invest in Ugandan banks or Tanzanian banks, they are not very strong, and the rates are not very, the Kenyan currency is more stronger, so the interest is better, and we can share that. And also the governance, so someone has to manage the money so that they can't keep managing the grant, the endowment. So those are the things that we've been also debating on: who takes responsibility, how much are we going to pay for the person managing the endowment, and all that stuff. But we are progressing, and that we haven't concluded yet. Then back to Rocker, I think the conversation is not really like British Council is leaving, or CKU closed the doors, or DUN is not interested. I think the conversation is like, you know, we want to create some sort of relief to the donors. We don't want every year to come to knock to your door, I need 20,000. Okay, you give it to me. And then next year I come, I need 20,000 to give it to me. And then next year I need 25 now, the inflation is high. We want to say, okay, you gave me 20 last year, you gave me 20 this year, next year I'll ask for 10 because I found 10 somewhere from on my own. And what we are saying to ourselves as an organization, it's like, you know, being at home and you have your small box where I throw some coins. You know, at the end of the year, you find you have 10,000 there that you can use for shopping. You don't need to ask your husband or your wife. So I think it's that story that we want to have a success story. And we've also understood that over the years, organizations have shut down, yet people have really invested a lot of money in them over years. And that makes it challenging for investors or donors to say, okay, we have this organization that we've been supporting and now we have run out of money, they are going to close down. That's not a good story. We want to make sure that if British Council says, okay, we don't have money because of the NHS needs more money, so no more money for culture, we are not going to shut down. We will continue. And that might also give them a chance to argue that, look, we supported the NES, we supported Bayimba, we supported CDEA, and they are still running because they put some measures in place to sustain themselves. I think this is a case that we are trying to make. But we are not saying don't support us anymore. We want them to come, but at the same time, we also want to contribute, you know, to ourselves. We don't want to be like our governments, because everything, they can't survive if the other governments don't give them money. We want also to help ourselves to be able to survive. And on the other side, we also want to, you know, invest in other things that are going to help us sustainable, because one of the challenges that we face as an organization is space. And we spend a lot of money on spaces we don't own. Yet donors don't want to pay for us to own spaces. So how do we find ways of having our own spaces that will help us to cut on the expenses that we spend on, you know, rent, taxes and stuff like that. So this is also another thing, another way of us financing our own way of getting our own spaces without, you know, challenging the donors to give us the money. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Faisal, for your comments. Quite interesting comments. As you say, space costs a lot of money. And it's strange because, like in Tanzania, for example, the space is actually owned by government. The land is owned by government. And yet, I was speaking with the minister in Dodoma, trying to tell him, sir, if we call some Mheshimiwa here, for those who don't know. So Mheshimiwa, government has land, has all these industrial areas that are actually owned by people who don't have industries. But these people, if they don't own industries, they're not supposed to be there by law. So the government needs to take this land which it legally owns and turn it into hubs. Nafasi Art Space is one of the area. However, they pay for that space. There's no need for paying for space when it is available. And some of these spaces have been turned into kumbi wa harusi, place where people do weddings and stuff like that. And it's quite an interesting point because it touches, and maybe we can have ways into looking into financing land through acquiring land. Because land is ours, and these areas can be found. We don't have to pay for them. But can be different in Kenya and Uganda. Anyone else wants to comment on that? On these questions, or I go to the next question? You want to comment?
There's a question of the Chinese,
Okay.
which is fascinating. I feel that this room, from yesterday and today, are very sensitive on the nationality of money. So yesterday we had a conversation on we had the conversation on the evils of the private investor. And then today we are sensitive about the exit of our partners, and what do we do in the absence of a guaranteed continued engagement, especially as direct funders. and then there's the looking east. At least Kenya started. We will review over time the impact of looking east. But then there's the other perspective of looking internally. While statistics have been raised that our populations are becoming consumer populations, there's more household incomes amongst urban middle class communities. Our GDPs are growing at 6%. Tanzania has been leading this growth curve.
7.
Oh, congratulations. Let's appreciate Tanzania and Ethiopia. And so we start to realize that there's also resident value and there's resident resources. So we have a challenge to start to recruit local philanthropy. We have a challenge to start to recruit local people who are interested in investing in arts and culture. I'll give you an example. Ayeta has been a CEO of a stable institution in this geography. She earns a good salary, I suppose. She always pays the bills when we're together. And I like to give stories so that you can also relate, because finance is finance. And so Ayeta will buy a car, Ayeta will buy a house, and then we'll put money, and I'm using Ayeta because she's my friend, and we'll put her money in the stock exchange, she'll put her money in a piece of land if you are in Kenya, she'll put your money in money markets and in a SACCO, and then come and say, can we find a local, an investor to come into the creative sector? And then wait for this other investor, this other person who has money in all the places but still wants to put their money in the creative sector. The question for me has that other person, who is that other person who will bring their money into the creative sector? We must be also consider investing here. I know a lot of us, especially as artists, already invest in ourselves, where when you make a little money, you buy a camera, you buy this and that, instead of running to buy a piece of land. But even as people, as we diversify our life savings, our earnings, we can also start to change our thinking and consider that I can also invest in this sector. While someone will come and tell you, hey, we can do a potato project. I'm seeing potatoes are making money in the market, or a tattoo in Kenya, and then you give them your 60,000. How about we also start to move our money within the creative sector? And we have seen models that are working. Stephen Gugu yesterday was telling us about angel investors. And there's an entire curriculum of helping individuals who have some excess amount of money to displace it to businesses and sectors that actually work. And so we are taking that challenge already, without taking the challenge of going to ask the Chinese first. I know they probably have big money, but we also have big money. Yourself, Mr. Chair, the challenge should be, in the next Mashariki conference, can we have a conversation that when you're seated here, you say, 10% of my savings or my investment or the excess amount, my surplus, is in the creative sector. I found a way to at least mobilize 10% of my resources. And therefore then we start to create models, because here, the Nest Arts Company decided their first earnings would go into Hiva. That's an example. Nest, as a company, is already instead of paying me, let's say, a bonus or something like that, we are putting that money into saving. I, as an individual, already start to invest in some of the businesses that I like, that maybe because I've seen the due diligence from Hiva, I'm like, I need to put something there. So can we also start to think of ourselves as investors? Can we also start to think of our sector as viable and useful for ourselves and our relatives who have money? Before we go 6,000 kilometers to convince people who we don't even know. So that's my argument for looking east. But yes, when we get to a place where you need more money than your social network, your income can sustain. Like me and Faisal here, we need a lot of money. We're happy to have friends. Then we look to the next level investment, but we have to start to think of ourselves as investor, because the investor is not a person with white hair and a certain accent carrying a briefcase. You and me are investors.
Thank you very much, George. A round of applause, please. Now you're really making sense to me that one of the cases that we have to make is to be able to invest locally ourselves so that it makes sense even to the person outside. That's really making a case. Ayeta, you want to speak about it?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to the local investment topic. I've actually convinced my board to be investors. And we have just, I think in the next month, we'll complete the process of setting up this company that is called Sana Biz Investments Limited. And our focus will be to invest in creative businesses as well. So yeah, we are on the road to being investors.
Oh, thank you very much. That's quite a good example. I hope he's asking how much. They're still working on it. I hope Madaraka is not using the plot of land in Butiama as a collateral. Please don't do that. That's a historical place. Just kidding. Well, there was a hand there, please. Oh, you have a mic. All
yes.
Right.
Actually, it feeds off very organically from what you're talking about right now, because it's about this whole tapping the local markets. We have this issue in Nairobi where, for example, people get rich and the first thing that they want to do is build an apartment complex. And now the market is flooded with apartments and it's just a complete mess. But part of what people are doing in order to encourage people to invest locally, forget specifically in the arts, but just investing locally, is designing products that are very much responsive to how people buy and invest. So last month we had the big launch of the bonds. You can actually buy a 3,000 shilling bond with the Central Bank of Kenya on your mobile phone. And it's 6 months, I think, is the shortest amount period, but it can go as long as you want and you can renew it as long as you want. The first subscription sold out in like 3 days. I think it was a crazy amount of time because it was an investment package that was designed with the Kenyan in mind. We tie this to the arts. I think that maybe one of the things to talk about as we're talking about building these funds, which are super important, is how do we translate this into things that people see and feel like I can put my money in this. As an investor, I'm not a musician, I'm not a dancer, I'm not a whatever, but I'm getting a return on my investment by giving the Bayimba Festival $1,000. I'm going to get back $1,050. I'm going to get back $1,200. How, as we're thinking about these products, are we also thinking about putting them together in a way that makes sense from an investment perspective from someone who is not necessarily in the art scene, who is really more interested in the bottom line? Recognizing that the returns on the investment on a creative industry are not going to be the same as buying shares in oil and gas. Recognizing that, and it's not going to be a 15% return. Maybe it's a 2% return. Maybe it's a 1% return. But really, is this something that's on your radar as you're thinking about building these products?
Still, stay with the mic, please, because you spoke very interesting about this bond thing, and I think it needs a bit of explaining, just a bit. You say people could buy bonds through mobile phone.
Yeah. So M-Pesa and it's mostly M-Pesa actually.
They are not government bonds.
They're government bonds. They're issued by the Central Bank of Kenya. You buy them on your mobile phone so generally to buy a CBK bond, you have to go to the CBK headquarters, you have to register, blah, 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 get an account, and then you buy bonds that way. What they did now is, and then the minimum I think has always been 100,000 shillings. Now what they've done is that there's an M-Pesa account that you can buy from your phone, and then it's like 5 or 6 steps. Click, 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 click. You buy a 3,000 shilling bond. it matures in 6 months, you get a return on your investment, and the bond is a government bond. So it will be treated, once the money is transferred, as any other government bond.
Wow, that's an interesting example. Quite interesting. I think that I had an experience last 2 weeks whereby someone wanted to invest in just projects, in some of the projects that we had. And this guy is coming from construction, and he thought, yeah, it made sense to his cause. He saw that there is a profit there. But you spoke about the margins. I just want to find out, is it true that the margins in the arts sector are going to be smaller compared to other areas? Are we clear about that? Can anybody make a comment? George, please.
I run a fund, so I can comment. Well, two things is that the basis of comparison at this point are completely, there's no given the specific metrics for, actually before I comment, is Stephen in the room? Stephen Google. Okay, when he comes, we will probably ask him to give the mathematical explanation. But this is what I think. There are some sectors within the creative sector whose income potential is absurd. When you think about visual arts, and you think about visual arts, specifically the market on arts auction. We've had 3 arts auctions in Nairobi, and all of them, especially the collections that have been able to go on sale and have earned more than 3,000% in one night. Then the questions are, who is the one earning? What is the correlation with the artist? Does the artist have to be a dead artist for visual arts to earn that much? And so in a sense, each sector has its own income potential. If you think about music performance and live music performance per se, that's another area that has a very huge impact, return prospects. If you think about fashion, especially with good working capital and the back value chain integration stuff, has massive potential. So in a sense, the reason we haven't seen great stories is because it's a factor of investment. But then the cases that we've seen that make great money, you can see the investment outlay. So what we are saying is that there's great potential, but there's very limited investment outlay. And therefore then, we can only test this potential properly once we put in our investment. But in terms of risk, Stephen is in the room. I know he would do this once you pay him to give him proprietary information and research. But I think Stephen can comment. Is that Stephen? Oh, he's not there.
Not, yeah.
Stephen can comment about the risk in the creative sector and sort of like returns. Yes.
Well, I don't know which part I've missed. I had to step to pick a phone call, but well, the creative sector, how I've seen, at least because we've done quite a bit of work with the due diligences for HIVA and so forth, looking at people in the fashion space, music and so forth. You have specific risks which are limited to that space, and you have risks which are just general business risks. The specific risks I've seen is at times some of the entrepreneurs that you're dealing with, their understanding of the business situation or the business environment is not very good. So they'll probably not keep very good records, which then you need to step in and help with that. They'll probably at times, from what I've seen, have not been as aggressive in terms of marketing because they are also creatives. And so to help with that, something I've found that to be interesting is to attach them either to someone who helps with in terms of business development, or to take a leaf from what HIVA is doing, is to have HIVA then market the creatives as a collective. So you have a fund of people who do fashion, who do photography and so forth. And so then as HIVA, you're able to interact with many corporates. You have a much bigger name And so if Safaricom wants to host something and needs people to be dressed, you can be able to negotiate that much more easily, yeah? Which helps in terms of the market access. In terms of the accounting, again, just borrowing from what, from a HIVA perspective, what has been achieved is having an accountant on the payroll of HIVA and having then that person start to create those books and to help the company to create something about themselves. The biggest risks usually are the people, the market access, and in terms of financing, I guess that has been addressed. So that's what I would say. The external risks, those are normal risks for an entrepreneur, that the economy could collapse, I don't know, whatever could happen, currencies could change and so forth. Those you can't really fight, but specifically that's what I would speak about. But the point I wanted to add on top of that is, I know we've been discussing endowment funds, but I want to just borrow from what's happening in most of the technology spaces. They did a research around incubators across Africa, ICT incubators. And they found that, I think apart from 2 incubators, one of which is in Ethiopia, I can't remember the name, they've not been able to find profitable, sustainable models for themselves. Yeah? And that's because a number of incubators in the ICT space spent a lot of time receiving grants and so forth. Of course, the grants are important, but you're always looking on the outside in terms of what are you going to do next. And so what now a number of incubators have started to do is, and if you look at, for instance, one of the biggest accelerator stroke incubators in Kenya, which is iHub, which is a legacy ICT hub, is that now they've gotten some space and they've created all these strategy, which is around renting the space for people to come and work from there. They have a whole consulting arm that goes to different companies and just looks for consulting and then takes a cut and passes this consulting to some of the guys who are coming and staying with them, for argument's sake, just as a revenue model. And so they've created this whole big strategy. Some of it is about the consulting arm, some of it is about how they use the space and how they rent it out to different people and so forth. And maybe some of the organizations that are there also need to look at themselves as businesses and just ask, if we were to make money today, yes, we are supporting art and everything, and there's a portion of our work which is going towards supporting. How can we make money from what we have as an asset? Because 5 years, 10 years from today, or maybe 2 years from today, or maybe the challenges you're facing today, the key question is that even when you create an endowment fund, and all of it is going towards operating costs, at some point it doesn't cover your costs because you hire more people, for argument's sake, and then what do? The interest rates are also flexible. You know, you start with an interest which is 10. If the interest rate goes to, like in Kenya, they cap the interest rate at 14%. If your budget was based on 20 and they cap it at 14, then what do you do at that point? So it can't be that you're looking at yourself as consuming in terms of expenses. It has to be that as a business, how do we make money? Yes, we have this revenue income, which is maybe interest, but what other revenue lines are we adding on top of that? Yeah? So just to challenge that, the thinking now is that you need to just think very creatively and spend a lot of time thinking as a business, and not so much that you make profit, but so much that you're sustainable and you have the impact that you want to have.
Oh, interesting. Quite interesting. He's saying, quite interesting, that it's not necessarily that you make bigger profits, but you can show to financiers the sustainability of the venture. That it matters, because among many would think like, okay, I need to show to this fund that I will make a lot of money. I will return this loan in a short period of time. But that's not the only thing. It means that you need to show that you are sustainable and in a longer term meaning. Oh, you wanted to comment, please. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I wanted just to make it clear that we don't want to mislead the audience here, that we are trying to create systems that are going to make us 100% sustainable. That's not going to happen, and it doesn't happen anywhere around the world. There is no arts in I don't know, maybe British Council, but there are also the London Symphony Orchestra is struggling. You know, the Opera House can close down. So I think no arts can be sustainable on their own. But what we are trying to say is that as organizations, what can we do to help ourselves to contribute to our expenses? And that can be, it can also be running costs. Like my target of the endowment is to make sure that I can cover my running costs. At the moment, around $110,000 a year. So if I can raise 1 million and I can get a profit of 150,000, it means that I'm not going to ask my donor to pay my salaries for staff. And that is a relief. And I think I can focus on raising money to run my programming. And I think this is one of the things that we have to really think about as managers, and for everyone else to think that, you know, we cannot sit back. We don't have the luxury anymore to sit back and say, okay, I'm going to look for 100% all the budget, and when it's over, I can look again. I mean, people are tired of giving money, and those who are giving, they don't pay for everything. So we really have to do something about it, and that's where we are coming from, and that's why we are really putting several different measures. I'm glad to hear like Ayeta is going into business, which is great. I mean, the Nest is also doing Hever Fund and other investments. They do invest in treasury bonds. We do invest. For the past 6 years, we invest most of our money in treasury bonds, and the profit we get, we use it for some programs that donors don't fund. We have businesses, you know, studios, and we just opened up a restaurant. All that money is coming in as businesses. It's feeding into our programming because we need other sources. We cannot rely on things, on one fundraising only. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. But I have a question. If you have a fund that you three, CDEA, Bayimba, and Hever has started, and as you have explained very well, that the fund is not about solving all your problems. So CDEA cannot take the fund just to do everything else. So she might have a program that she requests the fund to access the fund through a certain program, and there must be a management or a system whereby it approves or doesn't approve. Are you saying, is that correct?
Interesting, because we agreed on the terms. The last time we were in Dar es Salaam, we were on this eating restaurant. We're standing outside and having a 360 view of Dar es Salaam, and we're discussing the terms on what is Ayeta or Bayimba or George is going to use the money for. So we haven't really agreed on the nitty-gritties, but we are really discussing what kind of projects that Ayeta or me or George is going to apply for this fund when it's there.
So two things. The first thing is a structure of this argument. There are two levels. I know some of you in this room are arts managers of arts institutions. This conversation about the endowment fund is primarily around artistic institution sustainability. The correlation to impact investment is that part of our agreement is that we are not going to consume 100% of the returns by ourselves. Is that there's a percentage of that money that must be reinvested back to the sector. And so the conversation is how then, what is the vehicle for the percentage of the income that will be reinvested into the sector, and in what model? And that's now the conversation around the impact investment. And so I do not want the creative industries that are here and the fashion designers to think that we are asking you to be part of the endowment fund or to open an endowment fund. What indeed we are saying is that local funds and many vehicles of raising resources using different models are necessary in an industry. And we are challenging you to start to think within your subsector, whether through group contribution or fundraising, then it is possible for you to come up with a multi-model or even a single model fund. For us, we are highlighting the kind of innovation that we are trying to do as three organizations. The second level for us then is what are the specific policies within the vehicles that we are creating. One of them is definitely a contribution to our running costs to address some of our future anxieties. And that is a percentage of the income. And definitely, because we are the principals of this fund that we are trying to create, then we can be able to have this conversation as to what percentage of the returns of this restricted facility can we use for assets, can we use for running costs, can we use then for supporting the ecosystem. That's one conversation. The second conversation definitely is that this vehicle that we are opening is not for the 3 institutions that are here. It's also that if you are an arts institution that you feel that your struggles are our struggles, then there's a way for you to become part of this group, that you can start to contribute and become part of the principles. And indeed, in terms of institutions in Uganda, Faisal is there. So these are conversations that you can have directly with Faisal. Institutions in Kenya, I am available, and we've written to many institutions the way we had agreed to recruit them, to ask them to join in this dream. And some institutions, especially artistic institutions, are willing and are processing within their boards their entry, given the arrangement that we've already established. And Ayeta is here in Tanzania, and so if it is in your interest as an arts institution to start to consider saving, or an arts association, whatever it is, you can come and have conversations with Ayeta, and then at a point, then you can become a co-principal. So what we are saying is that we are trying to create a vehicle through which we can start to re-envision how we can generate resources and also collectively fundraise for collective objectives. So we are not saying that this is the only model. We are not saying that our model is perfect. Is that we are presenting an ongoing case and that we've decided to start our journey. Some of you are fashion designers who have massive national memberships. You are free to start exploring how then do you start to create paths of resources within your ecosystem. Today I met with Mr. President. What is his name?
Adrian.
Agres Simama. Wacha nikumulike kidogo. Let's appreciate Mr. President here. He has the mandate with all, thank you sir, you can have a seat. He has a mandate and he has a big membership in this republic. And the conversation around the resourcing and finance does not have to always end up at Grofin, because Grofin will tell you have to be profitable. And you have to share your growth value at a given coupon in the future date. If you come to HIVA, we'll tell you these are our terms. But as an institution, we learned yesterday, especially from the case of Rwanda, that the policemen and people in active duty started a bank. So it is upon us to start to dream about vehicles, about facilities, and about tools that can enable us to deepen our presence in this market, secure our growth opportunities, and also give us dignity. Because the question of dignity is critical if we are to establish an industry, a sector. You cannot be a sector where whenever donors say that there's a call for application, I look at Ayeta as my competitor. You know, if Ayeta gets $10,000, that means I'll get $5,000. So I'm looking to undercut Ayeta's innovation and say, these guys, they're not as innovative as we are. Have you seen the outcomes that we have made? So we need to move from that place by creating institution that also guarantees our own existence in our geographies. So I'm just trying to just put into context our presentation.
Thank you very much, George. George is saying we can, in our industry, start these kinds of funding. I will take one at the back there. We have not had anyone from the back there. Anybody with a comment, a question, or anything? There, the last person I'll take, please. Can we have a mic to her?
Thank you. My name is Zuhura Sengenge. I'm a writer and a performance poet, also a coordinator of Writers Lounge project at CDEA. My question is, well, it's not much of a question, more as a call to action and a challenge for all of us here today, is that okay.
Okay. Now we have a question here.
Yeah, so I was saying that as artists or as people who advocate for the arts, my comment is that so far as today, as in this 2-day conference has happened, we have seen people from music, fashion, accessories design, but personally I haven't heard or seen anyone who's spoken for the creative writers, but it's also a creative thing, and poetry also, because I think most of the times poetry is attached to music, if it's fused with music, and most of the time it's left out, it's not spoken of. So what I'm saying is we need to have institutions that speak for these two areas and also represent them in conferences such as this, so that they can also, we can also have ideas on how we can support them as part of this creative economy impact investment. And as our panelists have said, that they are inviting other institutions to, work together in the common goal. So my call is for every one of us to, when we go back home, talk to people that we know that are creative writers or poets. We know people, we know friends, so or funds, like in Kenya, I think, Uganda, we have the Babishawi Niwe Poetry Foundation. It's doing great things, as I've been, following up. So I was expecting would have people from that area, here talking about how poetry can, be part of this creative impact economy, but I haven't heard anything of such, so I decided to, speak out. So please, let's support these arts too, because they are they're part of all this creative thing, and they're doing good things, as we are all witnesses from whichever country we are coming from. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Remind me your name again?
Zuhura Sengenge.
Zuhura. Zuhura has an important, actually 2 points that I've marked for my comments. One is, sometimes we are multidisciplinary. Some people here are multidisciplinary, yeah, and they may not be speaking about specific, like I myself, I'm in the film industry. I'm also, as a visual artist, as a painter. I was a cartoonist for many years in this country. So yeah, but you make a point about associations and organizations that carry our interests forward. And I would like to shame the jewelry industry because they didn't have one. I went to their sessions today, but it's not really shaming them, but it's just an encouragement to form to form an association? Because some of these things we are speaking, I see the need to have policy level issues that I myself and the president have to carry towards the ministry. And these are the points that would help you put your points forward, put your interest forward. I must say that the jewelry industry is the most intelligent I've seen in this group after shaming them a bit. But I really learned a lot from their session. And any other comment? Okay, we don't have time. I hope you guys enjoy this session and has been productive. The rapporteur has taken the notes, and we better break for lunch. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Robert. And thank you, our speakers. As you get down, please pass over there to sign on that canvas. It's very important. And now it's time for lunch. And before we go there, there is an in-house announcement. May I welcome Angela to mention it.
So, ladies and gentlemen, would you please pass for a lunch coupon just by the desk as you head to where we had lunch yesterday, for those who are here. And for those who are not here, you just follow the line of the first person who takes the coupon, those who will be here. So we just go behind. For those who are pitching or who have already prepared their pitches, please meet me right here just before you go for lunch. Thank you.
Cool.